You gotta burn for this, Angel.
I know. In hell.
I've had encounters with ghosts or spirits for as long as I can remember. I remember things were always odd at my grandmother's house, and I spent a lot of time with her when I was younger. Things would move on their own. I had been pushed violently on more than one occasion. Things would disappear, and friends and family would also encounter strange things. If she didn't like you, then sure enough, something would happen to you. I had found out some things from my mother years ago that my grandmother also did other strange things, such as actively calling out to the spirit or being or whatever it was to go get someone. She would also kill small animals when I was a child and say things in a language I didn't understand. I have no idea if what she was doing was some sort of magic, or maybe she was just crazy, but she definitely hated my mother and us kids, except for my sister. That was all 30 plus years ago, and she's dead now. I've seen and experienced so many things since, it would be a very long read, so to make a long story short, some of the things I have experienced is seeing people I know and have them disappear right in front of me. One minute they're solid form and look exactly like a real person, and the next, they're gone. I've had this happen about 4 or 5 times since I was a kid. I've seen things that look like people. I can see all their features, but they're like a shadow, and one in particular appears under smoke alarms and will set them off. It's about 7 feet tall and looks like a reptile type of thing, and it wears a cloak. I'm not making this up. When moving from a house, I had returned to finish cleaning when I had to return to my car to get something, and I found I'd been locked out of my car with the keys in the ignition. I went back into the house to get my phone, and when I came out to call my husband and have a cigarette, I found all of the doors and windows on my car wide open. I'm not sure if this is related to anything, but it is weird, and happened when I pulled up to this house. There was a huge amount of dead flies outside the garage door. I mean huge, like a foot-long mound. I've had weird smells like a lady standing next to me with old-fashioned perfume, stenches like a broken sewer, and pretty much always feel like someone is watching me. I have things go missing a lot and return in odd spots. I've seen mists, and I used to have something black the size of a bowling ball that used to come out of one wall and go through another so loudly that my cat used to chase it. I'm not kidding. I've moved about 40 times in my lifetime, so I definitely feel like it's something to do with me rather than a haunted house. The last few years, I felt like something was trying to annoy me and not let me sleep, to the point that I can no longer go to sleep without medication. My kids are constantly being woken up by something in their room. They say a tall man with a cape and a hood is in there, and I'm not sure if it's the same thing that I've seen, but there it is. My son says there is a boy with sharp teeth and scruffy hair that hangs over the top bunk and looks down at him at night. We've started keeping a light on in their room all the time, and it seems to help a bit. Every time I try to go to sleep, I hear someone calling, "Mom," and banging on the wall and rattling my cupboards. My cupboards have metal rings on them for handles, and they make a very specific noise when you open the drawers. The noises banging on the walls happens when I've stayed elsewhere as well. I'm not asleep when this stuff is happening, and it can start as soon as I close my eyes. I've tried turning on the lights and watching for the noises and something to happen, but nothing ever does when I was looking that way. And as soon as I look away, things start to happen. I've tried to get help from paranormal investigators, and they did catch a toy being moved and some footsteps, but they couldn't help to get rid of whatever it was or shed any light on my situation at all. To be honest, I feel like something is trying to wear me down, and I am getting worn down. I'm constantly tired, and I feel like this wall that I've been building up to keep us safe is beginning to fall down. I've also sought out several so-called mediums and healers that have charged hundreds of dollars, but again, they've done nothing to help us. I've also cleansed the house often, sometimes daily. While I feel like it helps a little bit, it just doesn't remove it entirely. Hopefully someone here can offer me insight. If you have any comments, I'd love to hear what you have to say. I've done much research over the years, and I've never found anything or heard anything like what I'm going through. This happened years ago when I was 19. I'm now in my mid-20s. I still remember this very clearly because of how creeped out I was. Back then, I was living 600 plus miles away from my parents in a different state. Even though there was a distance, my mom and I still talked on the phone at least twice a week, and we were still really close. So when we found out her cancer was back, I didn't think twice about dropping everything to drive down to see her. A plane ticket would be too expensive, and I had a 10-year-old Toyota that might have been a bit beat up, but still got me from A to B cheaply and quietly. My parents weren't thrilled at the idea of me driving the 11 hours by myself, but my mind was made up, so they offered me a deal. I would stop at a rest stop every 2 or 3 hours to stretch my legs and call them, and in exchange for this courtesy, they would pay for my gas. If I didn't call within the 3-hour window, though, they would assume that I'd been in an accident and call me repeatedly, interrupting the audiobook or podcast they knew I would have on. I accepted the deal. And this is why I was at this particular rest stop at 2:45 a.m. It was actually one of the nicer stops. Well lit, multiple vending machines that didn't have huge cages around them, the payphone wasn't broken, and it looked clean. There were a couple of cars there with people sleeping in them, and I still had 15 minutes before I had to check in with my parents. I got out of my car and stretched, and then almost jumped out of my skin when I heard a man's voice right behind me.
"Miss, can I ask you for a favor?"
I turned around, and he's leaning against my car. I have no idea how he got there so fast. I didn't see him when I parked, but there he was, uncomfortably close to me. He looked to be in his 40s and didn't look dirty or twitchy. He was too close, though, and his body language didn't scream threatening, and even though I was 19 years old, barely over 5 feet, and at that point in my life 110 pounds soaking wet, I had already binged a lot of true crime media and knew the dangers of a girl alone my age at night with an out-of-state license plate. My dumbass asked what he needed. He told me that he accidentally locked his keys and his phone in his truck, and could he just borrow my phone real quick to call his friend? It would just take a second, and it would really help him out. I almost handed him my phone. I was reaching into my pocket to hand it to him with a Pollyanna, "No problem." And then I actually looked at his face. Like I said, this rest stop was surprisingly well lit, and this guy really looked normal. Except for his eyes. He had dead shark eyes. You know what I'm talking about. It's the Ted Bundy, Dick Cheney, actress in a Glade commercial who's trying to convince us she's in love with a dumbass who doesn't know how air fresheners work eyes. They're smiling, but the eyes are vacant and creepy and staring way too hard. I got that feeling, that runaway feeling, and I knew immediately not to hand this guy my only way to call for help. So I put on my best customer service smile and told him, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, but I don't have a charger and I need to save all my battery for the tracking app my parents have on my phone. And I need that juice to call my parents, which actually I have to do right now, but good luck." I turned and walked about 20 feet away, and he didn't leave. He was still just leaning against my car, watching me. Now I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to leave him alone with my car because he creeped me out and he had that serial killer face. So going to the bathroom was out. But I also wanted to get away from him and prove I'm not going to help him, and maybe he would leave. I could have technically gotten into the car, but I would have had to get really close to him unless I sprawled over my passenger side seat. And again, he was not moving. So I did the first thing that popped to mind. I called my dad, and my dad, for the first time that night, didn't pick up the phone. When I heard his voicemail, I glanced back at my car. The guy still hadn't moved. He was still just staring at me. So I faked a phone conversation with my dad. I angled my body so that the guy couldn't see that I had hung up the phone and loudly said that I should be home in about 30 minutes. In reality, I was still at least 4 hours away. I mentioned exactly where I was and reassured the fake caller that this was a good rest stop with plenty of lighting and a couple of visible security cameras. The guy still didn't move, and I was running out of steam on this fake conversation. In the years since, I've thought of a lot of things I could have said while pretending to talk to my dad, but in that moment, I was beginning to seriously freak out, and my mind went blank. So I hung up and didn't know what to do. I'd hoped the fake phone call would scare him off, but he was still there, leaning against my car. I stalled for another couple of minutes. I bought cookies from the vending machine, and I walked around a little. At this point, he'd been leaning against my car staring at me for at least 10 minutes, and I'd honestly debated walking up to one of the men sleeping in their parked cars and asking them for help. Just the thought of having to wake someone up to help me get into my own goddamn car annoyed me enough that I stopped stalling and headed back to my car. I decided that unless he touched me, I was just going to pretend he wasn't there. He waited until I was unlocking my car door before he started talking to me again. He told me again that he really needed to use my phone, and he was stranded unless he could call his friend to bring his spare keys. He wasn't angry or begging. His voice sounded weirdly friendly, but he had been creepily watching me for way too long while blocking my exit, so I wasn't falling for it. I almost pointed out the working payphone, and just in case I was wrong about this and I was being a bitch to a guy who really needed help. But then he leaned forward as I was getting in, and I lost all nerve and slammed and locked the door as fast as possible. He didn't move until I started the car and put it in reverse, and then he finally stepped back and let me pull out. I didn't even have my seatbelt on. I was so focused on getting away from him. And then, halfway out of the rest stop, my mom called me. My mom, who would freak out if I didn't pick up and who was already sick. I needed to put on my seatbelt. I could still see him in my mirror. He was standing right next to where I had parked, with his back to me. He was far enough away that I felt okay parking again to answer the phone, but I kept my engine running, and I kept watching him. I didn't want my mom to worry, so I told her everything was fine and where I was and my ETA. Now that I was in my locked car away from him, I was beginning to feel like I had overreacted. She scolded me about speeding, and I tuned her out because the guy was now moving. As my mom continued to lecture me about road safety, I watched the guy cross to a truck, unlock the door, and get in. The keys being locked in no longer seemed to be an issue for him. I watched the truck head out back to the freeway and drive out of sight. I had to pretend to be fine to not upset my mom, and I didn't get back on the road for another 20 minutes. And when I did, I didn't speed. I did not want to see that truck. I found out years later that the closest city to that rest stop has a major problem with sex trafficking, and that girls who look like they don't live nearby or maybe look like they're living out of their cars tend to be targets. I don't know if that was what was happening, or if he was just trying to scare me into handing over my phone. But either way, creepy guy at the rest stop, let's not meet.